An English labourer has been working hard all day. By the time he gets to his lodgings, he sits down to indulge in a luxury that was once reserved only for the rich and entitled. He lights his pipe and inhales the tobacco that has travelled half the world to get to him. He sits back and sips his tea contentedly, another luxury that was once unattainable to him. But today, the entire world is at his doorstep, thanks to the British Empire. To the channel. I am of course the Knight of History, and this is part number 5 of a series all about the British Empire. This is the final episode, and as the title suggests, it's time to talk about the lifeblood of the empire, the trade, and of course the wealth it produced, creating a nation that is proud. Now, let's get into this. As the colonies in the British sphere increased, the importation of goods increased as well. In fact, the volume of goods increased so drastically that the prices of these products began to drastically decrease. For example, in 1620, smoking was actually a luxury reserved just for the rich and the upper classes. A pound of tobacco cost 36 pennies, £105 in today's money, which was around 16 days' wages for skilled labourers. But by the 1660s, a pound of tobacco could just cost 1 penny, around £5 in today's money. So the luxuries of the empire were becoming open and available to everyone. Britain was also importing one of the most addictive things known to man: sugar. During the 1650s, around 20 million kilograms were imported, but by 1820, that number had increased to around 400 million kilograms. By the end of the 18th century, it is estimated that English workers would spend up to 11% of their wages on sugar, treacle, and the all-important tea. The amount of tea imported from China by the East India Company had increased from 1 million kilograms in 1730 to 14.5 million kilograms to Britain by 1890. Combining it with sugar and milk, it made the British fall in love with tea, and it quickly became a national drink, which it still is today. The wealthy took their tea and finely made porcelain imported from China, which was prized for its thinness. The porcelain, of course, unsurprisingly, became known as China. Sugar combined with the spices from the Far East, such as ginger, cinnamon, and nutmeg, were used to create dishes that we typically see in Britain today, such as the cakes, spiced buns, and chutneys. But the colonial trade did not only change the way that British people ate and drank, but also what they wore. At the beginning of the 18th century, a couple from modest background would have dressed exclusively in linen and woolen cloth produced in Britain. By the end of the century, however, a woman would wear fine cotton textiles or Chinese silks, whilst her husband would wear a fashionable tricorn hat made from Canadian beaver fur. These clothes would have been more colourful thanks to the imported dyes such as that of indigo dye from India. These goods and products were once seen as luxuries, but now they had soon become necessities. And the need to house these goods, a place to keep them, became increasingly important. Britain had around 50,000 shops in 1688, but by 1759 they had 1,602 shops, making Britain become a consumer society for the first time already in the 18th century. Throughout this time period, many European nations did not trade fairly with one another. What you could get in Italy would not be the same that you could get in England. Therefore, they wanted to protect their own trade and discourage trade with other European rivals. This was known as mercantilism. Mercantilism forced laws through by the end of the 17th century known as the Navigation Acts, which established how trade was to be done in the empire. All trade to and from the colonies would be carried by British ships. Taxes, known as custom duties, were placed on the imports of other European countries to encourage trade within the empire to make the empire richer and the people happy. This meant that Britain became the center of global trade. Goods from British colonies with America, Asia, and the Pacific all had to pass through British ports before they could continue on their journey throughout Europe, which meant that through tax, British merchants became extraordinarily rich. By the 1770s, 85% of tobacco and 94% of coffee passed through Britain before going on to the rest of the world. This made ports such as London, Bristol, Liverpool, Glasgow some of the fastest growing cities in the world in this time period. By the mid-18th century, 6,000 merchant ships were coming in and out of these ports, twice the number of merchant ships in France. Britain at this point was actually a young nation. It didn't exist before. It was only formed through the Union Act of 1707, which united the once enemies of England, Wales, Scotland, and Ireland. During the following years, the British identity began to form around Britain's role as a global power. The Scottish and Irish played a big role in the building of the British Empire. Half of the people involved in the British East India Company were indeed Scottish, and 1 in every 4 of the population in the colonies were Scottish or Irish. Both the Union Jack and the figure of Britannia became symbols of patriotism in Britain. In 1744, the very first version of God Save the King was published as a national anthem. There were politicians who appealed to the empire and the patriotism and could ensure support, such as that of the grandson of Thomas Pitt, William Pitt, whose family founded their fame and fortune because of the empire. Thomas Pitt would go on to become Prime Minister during the 7 Years' War. The spectacle of song was also used, such as the Song of 1740, which became linked to British patriotism for generations. The lyrics, however, point out the very dark heart of an empire. African slaves. Rule Britannia, Britannia, rule the waves. Britons never, never, never will be slaves. We will cover this topic in the future about African slaves and the terrible atrocities that they had to face in the Americas. But our next series is all about the events that led up to an Italian man who became the head of the French Empire. I'm of course talking about Le Petit Caporal, his birth name being Napoleone Bonaparte, better known to you and I as Napoleon Bonaparte. Thank you so much for watching. Like, comment and subscribe, the more you know.